Ladies and gentlemen, our first speaker is Ms. Rima Khalaf, Under Secretary General and Executive Secretary of the UN Economic and Social Commissions for Western Asia. Ms. Khalaf has launched pioneering projects to promote good governance, human rights, and human development in countries of the Middle East and North Africa. She is also a regular contributor to regional and international policy forums concerned with global governance and the state of development in the Arab world. In particular, Ms. Khalaf heads the preparation of the Secretary General's annual report of the economic and social repercussions of the Israeli occupation on the living conditions of the Palestinian people in the occupied Palestinian territory, including East Jerusalem and the Arab population in the occupied Syrian Golan. It is a pleasure and honor to have you, Madam, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished participants, it's a pleasure to be with you again. Let me start by thanking the organizers, the Committee on the Exercise of the Inalienable Rights of the Palestinian People, the Organization of the Islamic Conference, and the League of Arab States for hosting us, and particularly for selecting the subject of Israeli settlements as the theme for our meeting today. The subject is extremely important because as the title says, they are a major impediment and a major obstacle to peace. But not only that, Israeli settlements are an illegal enterprise used extensively by the occupation authorities to further dispossess and uproot Palestinians from their homes and country. The existence and expansion of settlements have elevated injustice in the occupied Palestinian territories to new heights. By illegally transferring parts of its population and some of its citizens to the occupied territories, and by according them special treatment and rights, Israel has established a calamitous system of segregation and racial discrimination, a system under which rights are a function of one's religion, identity, or ethnic origin. Discrimination is starkly manifested in the existence of two legal systems, one for Israeli settlers who enjoy the full rights afforded by the Israeli legal system, and another for Palestinians who suffer under harsh military rule. Consequently, the applicable law becomes a function of one's identity. Let's take as an example two 16-year-old boys, one Israeli and the other Palestinian. If they were to commit the same offense at the same time in the same locality in the occupied territories, the Israeli child would be treated as a minor with all the associated protections and rights. The Palestinian child, however, would face military detention, be tried by a military court as an adult, and be subject to harsh treatment that violates his internationally recognized rights. In addition to the two-tiered legal system, policies pursued by Israel in the West Bank consistently discriminate against Palestinians. The inequitable allocation of water to Israeli settlers and corporations provides a glimpse of this discrimination. Although water is illegally extracted from aquifers in the occupied territories, Israelis are allocated per capita up to 7 times the water provided to Palestinians in the West Bank. So this is discrimination. Segregation is starkly manifested in the fortress-like Jewish settlements scattered all over occupied Palestine. Roads are segregated. 65 kilometers of roads have been built on expropriated Palestinian land for the exclusive use of Israelis and Jewish settlers. They are inaccessible to the Palestinians who own this land. Ladies and gentlemen, this regime of discrimination and segregation is just one manifestation of the Israeli strategy to push Palestinians to either leave their country or accept Israeli de facto rule. This strategy employs three interlinked sets of policies: collective punishment of the Palestinian population, their displacement, and the construction of Jewish settlements in the occupied territories. There are numerous examples of collective punishment, a practice, may I remind you, which is prohibited under international humanitarian law and in direct violation of the Fourth Geneva Convention. The Gaza blockade is only one of these examples. 1.8 million Palestinians in Gaza have been living under a grinding blockade for over 8 years, causing levels of poverty to soar. More than 2/3 of Gazan families have become dependent on aid just to survive. The blockade has affected every aspect of Palestinians' lives: their health, their education, their environment, and their ability to live free from fear and free from hunger. The wall in the West Bank and the 500 other obstacles and checkpoints constitute another form of collective punishment. These measures subject Palestinians to severe mobility restrictions and significant hardships. They impede children's paths to school, farmers' roads to their land, and the journey of a pregnant woman to a hospital to deliver her baby. Attacks on civilian infrastructure are another form of collective punishment. During the 2014 offensive against the Gaza Strip, tens of thousands of homes and other civilian structures, including dozens of schools and hospitals, were destroyed. Around 1,500 civilians were killed, including 551 children. This offensive, previous military operations, and the ongoing blockade combined to make life in Gaza a man-made humanitarian crisis or disaster. Colleagues, I will turn now to the Israeli displacement strategy. The revocation of residency permits for Palestinians, practiced since 1967, has resulted in the exile of 250,000 people from the occupied Palestinian territory. Population displacement policies are most prominent in East Jerusalem, where Israeli authorities openly seek to attain a Jewish majority through what they label as the demographic balance policy. Discriminatory zoning and planning policies are another tool for displacing Palestinians. Such policies, enforced particularly in Area C and East Jerusalem, force Palestinians to build without Israeli construction permits, leaving them vulnerable to home demolition and consequently displacement. Moreover, many Palestinians are forced to leave their land and villages in the West Bank as a result of harassment and attacks by Israeli settlers and soldiers. Ladies and gentlemen, though an end in and of itself, displacement is also a means for achieving the third and most prominent aspect of the Israeli strategy in the occupied territories: land seizure and settlement construction. Land grabbing, or the acquisition of land by force, in direct violation of the United Nations Charter, began soon after the 1967 war, when Israel formally annexed East Jerusalem and the surrounding areas. This land seizure is currently being complemented by the construction of the wall in the West Bank, which will annex an additional 9.4% of its area. Other forms of land grabbing include direct confiscation of Palestinian-owned land and designating areas of the occupied territories as military areas, firing zones, and natural reserves. Over 25% of the West Bank has already been classified under one of these categories, making it completely inaccessible to all Palestinians. The most prominent example of land grabbing, however, remains the construction of Israeli settlements. Now, over 40% of the West Bank is under the control and jurisdiction of Israeli local and regional councils that oversee these settlements and their expansion. Ladies and gentlemen, consecutive Israeli governments have sponsored and supported the expansion of settlements and the growth of their population inside occupied Palestine. This was done by legalizing outposts set up by settlers, providing the needed infrastructure and public services, and offering generous incentives to Israeli citizens and businesses to move to the occupied territories and the settlements there. Today, an estimated 580,000 settlers live in 250 settlements in occupied Palestine. These settlements not only violate international law, they continue to be a source of danger and physical harm to Palestinians and their property. Attacks by settlers on Palestinians, their homes, natural resources, schools, mosques, and churches have been on the rise and continue undeterred. Settlers are thriving in a climate of impunity, as the Secretary General said in his opening remarks this morning. The Israeli government and army are obligated under international humanitarian law to provide protection to the Palestinians. Not only have they failed to do so, they have also failed to hold settlers accountable for their acts of aggression. This morning, the Foreign Minister of Palestine reminded us of one of the heinous crimes committed by Israeli settlers, that of burning a whole family alive, including an 18-month toddler. It is alarming but not surprising that in spite of the international outrage that ensued, not one has so far been brought to justice for this crime. Distinguished participants, the status quo is unsustainable. We cannot ignore the repercussions of an occupation that has been violating international law and human rights for half a century. We cannot ignore the Israeli institutionalized regime of systematic oppression and domination over the Palestinian people. We cannot turn a blind eye to a system that appears to constitute apartheid and racial segregation, as described by the Special Rapporteur on Human Rights in the occupied Palestinian territory. Ignoring injustice will only embolden the occupier to commit more violations, to generate more misery. The United Nations Charter and the principles of self-determination, non-discrimination, equality, justice, and the rule of law remain the basic tenets for the resolution of all conflicts. Applying these principles in Palestine is not only an ethical obligation, it is the only solution that will yield real and lasting peace for Israelis and Palestinians alike. Thank you.